Shadow soldiers, the rise and risks of Traoré's ultra-loyal battalions. What if I told you that, right now, in the very heart of Africa, in a land battered by terrorism, abandoned by allies, and underestimated by the world, a new kind of army is rising in silence? An army so loyal, so mysterious, so feared, that even the most powerful governments in the West are struggling to understand it, let alone control it. Yes, I am talking about Traoré's shadow soldiers, and their story could change everything you thought you knew about power, about loyalty, and about the fight for Africa's survival. Burkina Faso is not just another country on the African map. It is a battlefield of destiny. For decades, this landlocked nation has been caught in the storm. Terrorist attacks ravaging its villages, foreign troops claiming to help but serving their own interests, poverty strangling the hopes of its people. And yet, in the middle of all this chaos, something extraordinary happened. A young soldier, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, just 36 years old, defied the odds and rose to power. He did not come with empty promises or fancy suits. He came with fire in his voice, courage in his heart, and a mission that resonated with millions of Burkinabè people. The mission to reclaim their dignity, their land, and their future. But here's the truth most people don't see. Behind Traoré's speeches, behind the rallies and the songs of support, behind the viral videos of him standing tall in his red beret, there exists a force shrouded in secrecy. A force handpicked to protect him, to defend his vision, and to make sure that no betrayal, no foreign scheme, no terrorist ambush can break his rule. This force is known among insiders as his ultra-loyal battalions. To the people, they are whispered about as the shadow soldiers. Why were they created? The answer is simple. History. Africa's past is filled with leaders who dreamed big, leaders who wanted to free their people from foreign chains, but who fell not only because of outside enemies, but because of traitors within. Thomas Sankara, a hero of Burkina Faso itself, was betrayed by those closest to him. Patrice Lumumba of Congo was abandoned by his own ranks. Gaddafi of Libya was encircled by those he once trusted. Traoré studied this history. He knew the painful lesson. In Africa, betrayal often comes not from the battlefield, but from the back door. Enemies don't always wear the enemy's uniform. Sometimes they wear yours. So how do you protect yourself from betrayal? How do you build a shield strong enough to resist not only terrorists in the desert, but also infiltrators in the palace? The answer was to create a new kind of army. Not an army bound by tradition, not an army swayed by foreign money, but an army inside the army, an elite corps bound by something deeper than salary or rank, loyalty. Not just loyalty to Traoré the man, but loyalty to Traoré's mission, loyalty to the idea of a free and sovereign Burkina Faso. This is how the shadow soldiers were born. Unlike conventional forces, these battalions are trained in secrecy. They are not chosen at random. They are handpicked, often from families, villages, and communities that already see Traoré not as a distant president, but as one of their own. Some were childhood friends. Some were inspired by his words. Some were recruited because they had already proven that their loyalty could not be bought. Their training is harsh, yes, but it goes beyond guns and drills. They are trained ideologically. They are reminded day after day of why they exist, to defend the land, the people, and the mission. They are told again and again, you are not here for Ibrahim Traoré the man. You are here for Burkina Faso. You are here for Africa. You are here for dignity itself. This is what makes them different. They are not just soldiers. They are guardians of a vision. They are living symbols of resistance. And when you imagine a group of young men and women so committed that they would rather die than betray their commander, when you realize their loyalty cannot be shaken by money, by fear, or by promises from foreign powers, you begin to understand why the world is watching. Because yes, make no mistake, the world is watching. Washington is watching. Paris is watching. Brussels is watching. They know very well what is being built in Burkina Faso. They know that when a leader has an army of loyalists behind him, when he builds a shield that cannot be infiltrated, he becomes almost impossible to overthrow. And that terrifies them. Because the West remembers Sankara, they remember Lumumba, they remember every African leader who dared to dream of independence. And they remember that each time they succeeded only because those leaders were betrayed from within. So imagine the nightmare if Traoré's system works. Imagine if this young captain proves that you can create soldiers so loyal, so disciplined, so committed, that no amount of dollars, no foreign plot, no secret operation can turn them. If that happens, it won't stop at Burkina Faso. It will spread. Mali will copy it. Niger will copy it. Chad will copy it. One by one, African nations will begin to rise with arms the West cannot buy, cannot bribe, cannot corrupt. That is why Traoré's shadow soldiers are not just a local force. They are a global concern. But let's pause for a moment, because while all this sounds powerful, it is not without risk. Every coin has two sides. Shadow soldiers are a blessing, but they could also be a curse. Loyalty to a man is beautiful when the man is righteous. But what happens when loyalty becomes blind? What happens when soldiers obey without question? What happens if tomorrow a less noble leader rises and inherits this same loyal force? The danger is real. Blind loyalty can become oppression. Secret armies can become weapons of fear. History is full of examples. In Congo, Mobutu's presidential guards were feared not by enemies, but by his own people. In Libya, Gaddafi's loyalists both protected him and haunted the population. In other countries, elite guards turned against their own citizens to keep a single man in power. Could this happen in Burkina Faso? Could Traoré's shadow soldiers one day shift from protecting the people to silencing them? It is a haunting question, and Traoré himself seems to know it. Unlike many leaders before him, he keeps repeating, "I am not important. What is important is the country." The challenge is whether this conviction will hold when power is tested, when threats multiply, when enemies close in. Yet even with these risks, we cannot ignore the power of symbolism. In Africa, symbols matter. The shadow soldiers are not just military muscle. They are a message to terrorists, we are stronger than your chaos. A message to the West, we are not for sale. And most importantly, a message to the people of Burkina Faso, you are not alone. When villagers see mass battalions moving with discipline through their towns, when they see young men and women willing to die for the nation, it sparks something powerful: belief. Belief that maybe for once, a leader has built a shield around his people instead of a wall between himself and them. But will this shield hold, or will it one day backfire? The truth is, no one knows. History offers both warnings and hope. In Cuba, Fidel Castro's Revolutionary Guards ensured independence for decades. In Libya, Gaddafi's forces held strong for years until betrayal cracked the walls. In Burkina Faso itself, Sankara's dream was destroyed by those he thought he could trust. Traoré's challenge is to ensure his shadow soldiers remain guardians of freedom, not instruments of fear. That requires one thing above all: accountability. Yet accountability is the hardest thing for secret forces. The more hidden they are, the harder it is to make sure they serve the people, not just the leader. And that is the paradox. Still, we must admit the courage of the experiment. For decades, Africa's story has been one of external control. Leaders rise and they fall. Nations fight and they are weakened. Dreams begin and they are crushed. But here in the middle of the Sahel, a young soldier is trying to write a different story. A story where Africans defend themselves with their own hands. A story where loyalty is rooted not in foreign money, but in shared destiny. The shadow soldiers are not just a military unit. They are a gamble that Africans can finally defend themselves, that they can finally stand tall without begging for protection from others. It is a dangerous gamble, yes, but sometimes the most dangerous gambles are the most necessary. Because without risk, there is no revolution, and without revolution, there is no freedom. And so we return to the challenge and the solution. The solution is not to dismantle these battalions, as critics demand. No, the solution is to refine them, to make sure they remain true to their mission, to ensure that loyalty to Traoré is not separate from loyalty to the nation, to embed them in communities, to let them protect villages as much as they protect the capital. If this balance is achieved, then Traoré's shadow soldiers could become a model not just for Burkina Faso, but for the entire continent. Imagine it, a network of ultra-loyal battalions across Africa, each one protecting its people, immune to corruption, unshaken by foreign plots. Imagine how much harder it would be to destabilize countries, to assassinate leaders, to buy off armies. That is the dream. And if it succeeds, it will mark the start of a new era, an era where Africa finally takes control of its own security. So tonight, as you think of these mysterious battalions moving silently through Burkina Faso, remember this: they are not just soldiers. They are the symbol of a fight much bigger than one man, one leader, or one country. They represent Africa's eternal struggle, the right to stand tall, free from manipulation, free from betrayal, free from control. Yes, there are risks. Yes, there are dangers. But without risk, there is no revolution. And without revolution, there is no freedom. And that is why the story of the Shadow Soldiers is not just the story of Burkina Faso. It is the story of Africa itself. If you believe that Africa deserves to tell its own story, if you believe leaders like Ibrahim Traoré should not stand alone in this dangerous journey, then don't just watch this video. Be part of the movement. Subscribe right now. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Do these Shadow Soldiers represent hope or danger? Share this with someone who still thinks Africa cannot rise, because the world may try to silence this story, but together we will make sure it is heard. This is not just news. This is history, and you, yes you, are part of it. The story doesn't end with Traoré's rise. In fact, that's it. Because when you build an army in the shadows, you are not just protecting today, you are shaping tomorrow. And the question now is, what kind of tomorrow will Traoré's Shadow Soldiers create? Let's go deeper. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. Somewhere in Burkina Faso, far from the capital, deep in a dusty military compound shielded from public eyes, dozens of young men stand in silence. They are not talking. They are not laughing. They are not even moving. They stand as statues, eyes locked forward, waiting for the signal of their commander. The sun burns down on them, but not a single one flinches. Then, as a whistle cuts the air, they move in unison, like a machine, marching, running, training with weapons, dropping to the ground and rising again. Their movements are sharp, precise, almost frightening in their discipline. These are not ordinary soldiers. They are not driven by hunger for money or desire for status. They are driven by something far deeper, a shared oath, an oath to defend Ibrahim Traoré's vision, even if it costs them everything. And this oath, this deep, almost spiritual commitment, is what makes the Shadow Soldiers unlike any force the world has seen in recent African history. But here is where the story becomes even more fascinating, because the existence of such a force changes the balance of power, not only within Burkina Faso, but across the entire Sahel region. For decades, African armies have been plagued by the same disease: corruption. Foreign governments pour in money, weapons, and training programs. But when trouble comes, soldiers defect, generals take bribes, and loyalties dissolve. Foreign powers know this. They have used it to control Africa for generations. They never needed to invade outright. They simply bought off the armies from within. But what happens when you build a force that cannot be bought? What happens when you create soldiers who are immune to the very tool that foreign powers have always relied on? That is why the Shadow Soldiers are not just a military experiment. They are a geopolitical earthquake waiting to happen. Picture this scenario. Tomorrow, a foreign power tries to destabilize Burkina Faso. They send envoys with suitcases of cash, whispering promises of power and comfort. They target generals, ministers, commanders. But when they approach the Shadow Soldiers, something shocking happens. The money is rejected. The promises are ignored. And the betrayal they are counting on never comes. In that moment, the foreign plot collapses. The empire of manipulation crumbles. For the first time, the script of history is flipped. And that is why Traoré's gamble is so dangerous. Because if it succeeds, it will not stay in Burkina Faso. It will spread. The very idea of soldiers who are unshakable, who cannot be corrupted, will echo across Africa like wildfire. From Bamako to Niamey, from N'Djamena to Kinshasa, leaders will see a new blueprint of survival. And foreign powers will lose their oldest weapon, betrayal. But again, we must not be naive, because loyalty is a double-edged sword. When loyalty is pure, it protects. But when loyalty becomes blind, it enslaves. And this is the razor's edge Traoré must walk. Imagine a future where the Shadow Soldiers, instead of defending the people, begin to fear them. Imagine a day when criticism of the government is seen as betrayal. Imagine if those same ultra-loyal battalions are deployed not against terrorists or invaders, but against ordinary citizens demanding their rights. It has happened before. Across Africa, across the world, history is full of secret armies that began as shields of the people, but became swords of oppression. Will Traoré's shadow soldiers escape this curse? That is the question burning in every observer's mind. To understand the stakes, we must look back at Africa's heroes and its tragedies. Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's greatest son, believed in the power of self-reliance. He built schools, clinics, and farms. He gave women equal rights. He told the West boldly, "We do not need your aid. We will build with our own hands." But despite his vision, he was betrayed by those closest to him, his own brothers in arms. His dream was silenced with bullets fired not by foreign soldiers, but by men who once swore loyalty to him. Now, decades later, Traoré walks in Sankara's shadow, and he is determined not to meet the same fate. That is why he surrounds himself with loyalists trained not just to fight, but to resist betrayal. But even Sankara's ghost whispers a warning. Loyalty can change. Today's friend can become tomorrow's enemy. Today's shield can become tomorrow's knife. The psychology of the shadow soldiers is fascinating. These are not mercenaries, not men hired for pay. They are shaped to believe they are guardians of destiny. But what happens in the mind of a young soldier who has been told since training that his commander is the symbol of the nation? What happens when criticism of the commander feels like criticism of the country itself? This is where loyalty becomes dangerous. Because if the people ever disagree with the leader, will the shadow soldiers listen to the people or to the man they swore to protect? It is a delicate balance, a knife's edge, and the entire future of Burkina Faso rests on how that balance is maintained. But let us imagine the best-case scenario. Imagine that Traoré succeeds in shaping them not as blind loyalists, but as guardians of the nation's values. Imagine that instead of silencing critics, they protect them. Imagine that instead of becoming a secret police, they remain a shield against terrorism, corruption, and foreign plots. If that happens, the shadow soldiers will become more than just battalions. They will become a legend, a model for Africa's future. Proof that Africans can build disciplined, incorruptible forces with their own hands. The benefits would be enormous. Villages would feel safer. Leaders would feel more secure. Terrorist groups would lose ground. Foreign powers would lose influence. And Africa would begin to rise with a new confidence. A confidence built on self-defense. But this dream requires discipline. It requires wisdom. It requires leaders who resist the temptation to use loyal soldiers as personal weapons. And this is where Traoré faces his greatest test, not in the battlefield, but in the corridors of power. Because power, as we all know, changes people. Power whispers in your ear, telling you that you are indispensable. Power tempts you to use loyalists not just for protection, but for control. Will Traoré resist this temptation? Will his shadow soldiers remain defenders of freedom instead of instruments of fear? Only time will tell. Now, let's step into the shoes of the Burkinabè people for a moment. Imagine being a farmer in the north, where terrorists once roamed freely. Imagine seeing masked soldiers, disciplined and determined, moving into your village to protect you. You would feel hope. You would feel safe. You would feel that the government finally remembers you. This is the power of the shadow soldiers, not just military strength, but psychological strength. They give people hope, and hope in a country that has suffered so much is more powerful than any weapon. But now imagine another scene. Imagine being an activist in the capital, organizing a protest for better wages or more schools. Imagine the same shadow soldiers showing up, not to protect you, but to stop you. Imagine their presence turning hope into fear. This is the danger. The same force that can protect can also suppress. And so the future of the shadow soldiers is not written in their training, their loyalty, or their weapons. It is written in the choices of the leader who commands them. But let's widen the lens even further, because what is happening in Burkina Faso is not just about one country. It is about Africa's place in the world. For decades, Africa has been seen as weak, divided, dependent. Foreign powers come and go, building bases, mining resources, toppling leaders, and buying loyalty. Africa has been the chessboard, not the player. But if Traoré's experiment works, the chessboard begins to flip. Imagine an Africa where leaders are shielded from betrayal, where foreign dollars cannot penetrate the ranks, where armies exist not to serve outsiders but to defend their own soil. That is a different Africa, a stronger Africa, a freer Africa. And that is exactly why the world fears Traoré's shadow soldiers. So let us return to the central truth. This is a gamble with history, with destiny, with the very soul of Burkina Faso. If Traoré succeeds, he will not just be a leader. He will be remembered as the man who rewrote the rules of African survival. But if he fails, if the shadow soldiers turn into instruments of fear, then Burkina Faso risks repeating the same tragedies that have haunted Africa for decades. This is why the story of the shadow soldiers is so compelling. Because it is not just about soldiers in the shadows. It is about the eternal struggle between freedom and fear, between hope and betrayal, between destiny and danger. And so I ask you this, when you hear about these mysterious battalions, when you see images of masked soldiers marching with unwavering loyalty, what do you feel? Do you see hope or do you see danger? Whatever your answer, one thing is certain, the shadow soldiers are here. They are real, and they are shaping the future of Burkina Faso and perhaps of Africa itself. So if you believe this story must be told, if you believe that Africa deserves to defend itself, if you believe that loyalty can be a weapon of freedom instead of fear, then join this movement. Subscribe right now. Share this video so more people can understand what is happening. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe the shadow soldiers are the future or a risk? Because this is not just a story. This is history in motion, and you, right now, are part of it.